Alors bonjour à toutes et à tous et bienvenue à celles et ceux qui nous rejoignent aujourd'hui. Nous allons commencer la matinée par une intervention de Teresa van Dongen qui aura lieu en anglais et que je vais vous présenter brièvement tout de suite. Teresa van Dongen is an Amsterdam-based designer. She was born in 1988. Nature and science have always marveled Teresa. For that reason, she chose to study biology after she finished her high school education. This is where she discovered that there are many secrets of nature that remain almost unknown and that great development in the field of science very often don't make it outside the doors of a laboratory. In 2010, she followed her creative passions and applied to the Design Academy Eindhoven, where she continued to incorporate nature and science in her designs. Currently, she works with light as a visual translation of her exploration into alternative and natural energy sources. Teresa strongly advocates collaboration between scientists on the one side and designer and artists on the other side as a means to drive the implementation of innovation. She likes to think that it is great to understand the language of physics, chemistry, and biology, but that the greater value lies in collaboration with people that can continue to surprise and inspire you with their knowledge. In June 2014, Teresa van Dongen graduated cum laude at the Design Academy Eindhoven. She received several awards with her work ever since. She was the proud winner of a Dutch Design Award in the category of Young Designer during the Dutch Design Week in 2015 in Eindhoven, and received a Creative Heroes Award for her work Spark of Life in 2017. Voilà. Et maintenant, je laisse la parole à Teresa.
Thank you very much for this nice introduction, Olivier, and thanks everyone for being here online on this early hour for this nice symposium on with new digital media and everything. I'm very honored to be here. So yeah, I will tell you a little bit today about the project that I showed at Le Fresnoy, but I will also start a bit earlier about my studio and how I came to be doing what I am doing. So I'm going to share my screen with you. Just give me a second. One second. Oh, that's okay. So I call myself actually a bio designer, and that has come to be because I started out studying biology and switched at some point to the Design Academy in Eindhoven. And from a certain moment on during my studies, I started to combine these two fascinations and professions because I thought it was a very valuable thing to do, especially like Olivier also introduced, because within the scientific world, it is not always the aim to translate the things that they discover, the scientific developments, into something tangible. And that's where it's really nice if designers and scientists are collaborating to put the innovation into our daily life. So just to tell you a little bit what you see here on the screen, they are microorganisms. They are called dinoflagellates, and they were one of my first inspirations in the intersection between science and design. And these microorganisms, they emit light from their body, and you might know them from this phenomena in the sea on warm evenings when there's these microorganisms are abundant in the sea. Whenever a wave turns, the movement causes all these microorganisms in the sea to light up, resulting in a spectacular phenomena like you see here. And then what actually surprises me as a designer is that, you know, we human beings, we've been on the moon, but sometimes I think we barely even know our own planet. Like, for instance, the deep sea, we're discovering that almost 90% of the sea creatures in there, they can actually emit light. And oftentimes this is in a so-called symbiosis, like you see here with the octopus. It's a symbiosis. It means it's working together with microbes, bioluminescent bacteria on its skin. And the octopus is taking care of them. He's providing them with nutrients. But at the same time, the octopus is taking advantage of this by being able to communicate with these microbes on his skin. It's attracting prey, but it's also attracting a partner to mate, or distracting maybe predators with the light on its body. So in 2014, I started a research to see if we humans could maybe also start a kind of symbiosis with these microbes, and to see if we could make use of this natural light in our daily life. And for this, I worked together with the Delft University of Technology, two master students, Bart and Richard, and they helped me to isolate these bacteria from the skin of sea creatures. So we started out with quite some fish and octopus and everything from the market, and just from the fish market. And we managed in the end to isolate, like I introduced you, the octopus. We managed to isolate it from the octopus. And then it was, of course, a challenge. How do we keep this alive? How do we make it into a luminous object in our daily life? And the first test was just in a quite kind of a flask, which was attached to a pump, and the pump would provide for the oxygen for these bacteria. And when the oxygen was coming through, this whole flask would light up, like you see in this picture. And of course, this was a really great result. But on the other hand, as a designer, I thought this is natural light, and now it's actually such a disappointment that now I have to attach a pump. I don't want to use external energy. So I started to think about ways in which I could show the light without having to use the pump. So I was walking through the lab and I saw this. You turn the light off and all these flasks are actually emitting light. And this is just caused by the movement. And this movement is causing these flasks to get oxygenated. The oxygen is mixing and they start to emit light. So I thought I have to involve movement into my design. So I'm really jumping through the project right now, but in the end, for my graduation in 2014, I created Ambio, which is a kind of a balance with two heavy weights. And in the middle, it had a tube with these bioluminescent bacteria in there. And the idea was that you, as a visitor and usually guided by me, you could set this whole thing, it's quite big. Sorry. You could set the whole thing in movement. You could give it a gentle push, and then because of this movement, the bacteria would mix with the oxygen and start to emit light. So as a spin-off kind of this project, in 2016, I created an installation called One Luminous Dot, which was a winning proposal of the Eyes on Talents Award and was shown in the Musée des Arts Décoratifs in Paris. And the idea behind this installation was to create a kind of an experience for people. And so it was kind of an infinite space. People would enter it and they would not know how big it is, just because it was quite dark, but it was mirrored. But your eyes would get slowly adjusted to the small amount of light, and you could see further and further and further. There was a soundscape, and the tubes of light, they were moving. And I called it One Luminous Dot just to refer to this feeling of this otherworldly feeling when you would enter this space. But at the same time, when you learn about the project, you would start to know that actually it's not otherworldly. It's just all light and something deriving from our own planet, our own one luminous dot out there in the universe, which is so phenomenal and spectacular. And we sometimes forget it. So talking about space, there's something really interesting actually about it. The fact that when we as humans, we try to travel out there, out to space, to find other worlds or just to discover it. But at the same time, what we learn from this is actually everything that you take away from the planet when you leave it, that is all you have. So if you leave Earth in a capsule, you have to start to use everything you bring and live, how we call it actually nowadays, it's living very on a circular level. So there is no waste actually, because you need to reuse everything. And this is something that we can actually learn from on Earth a lot, because we're not always living in a circular way. So I was going to a lecture from Professor Christophe Lasseur, I think in 2016, and he was telling to the audience about a method in which they could harvest energy from the urine from astronauts. And I thought, this is super interesting. Why can we not do this on our planet, in daily life? So after that lecture, I talked to him and I said, is it possible to create something like just for here with this technology? And he referred me to a specific bacteria, which is called a geobacter. And it is found on Earth in the muddy soils of rivers and lakes. And this bacteria, which is living there, it's actually in a similar way, like we always have CO2 that we need to breathe out. It doesn't have CO2, but it has electrons that it needs to get rid of. So electrons, that is energy. So it's constantly getting rid of energy. So of course, as a designer, you just want to plug your lamp and create something with the mud and be ready. But of course, it doesn't work like that. But I was starting to investigate these bacteria. And what you see is here in this image, a microscopic image, is this bacteria. It's making a small harpoon. And it's actually making an electrical connection to a conductive surface. So that means it's using, through that thread that it's making, it's using is to get rid of these electrons. And this system, it's been investigated at the Center for Microbial Ecology and Technology at the Ghent University. And I started to work together with them. And what they are actually investigating is the fact that these bacteria, they are able to clean wastewater, or they clean water, and at the same time produce energy. So the idea was, can we in the future maybe clean our own wastewater streams and produce energy in the process? So it was investigated for about 25 years, but in the end, this big idea, it was never found profitable enough. So it is actually now in the lab, it's only research for the ability of these bacteria to clean. So they clean maybe even like oil spills and phenomenal things like this. But on the other hand, they are not doing so much with the fact that it can produce energy. So I asked them, can we maybe collaborate for me to create an object with which I use these bacteria to produce energy and light, because I'm a designer that likes to work with light and energy. Or at least I think light usually is a very interesting and visual translation of energy. So that's the reason for my choice of light. So I started to work together with them to create these very small electrode modules. And you see them here. And these are objects that we created in such a way that these bacteria can live on them, and they can complete their metabolism on them, and they can excrete the energy, and we can harvest it. And based on this, I started to connect it to the electronics with 4 LEDs attached to it, and in a design for which I also created the glass vessels, of course, in which you need to capture these or maintain these microbes. And I thought it's nice for you maybe to see the bit of the glass blowing of these vessels that I will show you in the final design. That is called Spark of Life, and I created it in 2016 and showed it this year at Le Fresnoy for the exhibition Le Humain, Co2 Vient. So to explain just briefly again, like how this system of Spark of Life works, you see 4 vessels with a liquid of these containing these bacteria in there, and each vessel has one of these black electrodes in there, and each one of the vessels is powering 1 LED. So you have in the surrounding, you have 4 LEDs which are shining their light through the liquid and the glass. It's about this big. A lot of people confuse it, think it's maybe smaller, but it's quite big. And so I had the honor of showing it at Le Fresnoy, and this is at the exhibition with Pascal Pronier and Benjamin Weil. And so I just want to tell you a little bit also about the continuation of this project. So what I realized from making Spark of Life was that the light effect, it was quite small. So I started to investigate if I could maybe enhance the amount of light that was coming from this. So I started to work with lenses and diffusers, like you see here. And this investigation led me to create another installation, which I was able to show in 2019 at the Centre Pompidou. This is the light effect, if you see it by a little film. And it was a little bit inspired also, this creation of the light by facet eyes of insects, because I wanted to give the object a kind of a lively feeling, but because it is alive actually. And so I came to this shape almost like an insect maybe. And it's the size of maybe a 5-year-old kid or something, like quite high as well. And I created a series, which you can see here. And the great thing about this project of Spark of Life and Electric Life, this one I called Electric Life, is that if you think back about the previous project with the bioluminescent bacteria, this specific installation, I had to feed it every day. So it was a lot of maintenance for me to feed it every day and to refresh this liquid. And of course, that made it more into an art object almost than into a design object, because I could not ask that from people. But this one, it's very special. It has a very strong ecosystem of bacteria. So they can provide for themselves mainly, but if you feed it once a week with some tap water and some, like a teaspoon of vinegar, it will be on 24/7. So it makes it more like a house plant. You know, you need to water it every week, and I can imagine that people maybe someday, with the human to come, maybe they will also have to feed their lamps on a daily basis. I don't know. So you see in the image, you see the small tube on the top, you just insert the water and the vinegar in there once a week. And then as a continuation, I, of course, until that point, I always received the bacteria directly from the Ghent University. But then I started to investigate if I could find them on the islands in the Netherlands, if I could find them in nature myself. And I started to take samples in salt water, in sweet water, in semi-sweet water, or it's not called sweet water, it's just a salt water, and the other one is sweet in Dutch, but I don't know in English. Okay, so to jump to this place, it's an old bomb crater on Terschelling in the Netherlands, in one of the islands. And it's a very interesting space because usually waters are connected to each other, but this water, it's completely isolated. And because probably it's isolated, it had a very strong ecosystem. So everything that's going on there, to use the same word I used before, it's quite circular. And for that reason, probably these bacteria that have a cleaning power, they were very abundant in this space. So when I took a sample there and I tried to connect it to my system and to create light with it, it was working very great. So for this very famous festival in the Netherlands, it's called Oerol. It's a theater festival on this island with an art route on there. I created this installation. and it was called Madwell. And what it did was actually, it was using directly the energy coming from this old bomb crater to create a light effect that you see here. So the bacteria in there were constantly powering this small light source, which was mirrored in this kind of a kaleidoscope light installation. And I had thousands of people visiting it every day. This was a very busy festival. And then what was really nice about them, the whole experience as well, is that you could read about all the locations that I took the samples, and people could connect actually each sample themselves to a light. And while trying that out, the connection, you could see how well each of these places were working. And then you could also see the sample of the old bomb crater, that it was just working very well and continuously. So that's the last stage that I was in with this technology. And currently I'm working on a smaller model, which will be more like almost a consumer version, which I hope that at some point, people in the future, they will have an object like that at home, a light source that you have to feed on a weekly basis. And just very briefly to tell you a little bit what I'm currently working on, I'm doing 2 artists in residence, and one of them is about an organic solar cell. So if you think about solar cell technology, it's of course something very green, but at the same time, all these solar cells, they will create the Mount Everest of waste by 2050 if we continue to produce them in this way. So a very recent discovery to make a solar cell made with kiwi fruit waste, so actually made with, it's organic, it's made with fruit. They can make a solar cell which is much more sustainable and circular than the existing solar cells. And I'm going to have the honor to create the first application of this solar cell next year. Another project that I'm doing, it's into CO2 fixating products. That sounds maybe a bit confusing, but that is actually materials that do not have a CO2 footprint. So they do not excrete CO2 in their production, but they capture it. So in the production, for instance, of a sort of concrete, which you see on the top right, it's a kind of a clay material. You can make all kinds of clay kinds of objects with that. In the process, they can insert CO2. So it's a recent development that we can create materials that are not harmful for our environment, but they actually help make a better place out of this world. And this project, you will be able to see it at Transnatural. It's called the Unknown Mine Zone in Amsterdam. Probably not for a while with the current Corona situation, but it's going on till June 2021. So just maybe say please that we can by that time be able to have more exhibitions and for you to visit this one if you're interested. Currently it has Electric Life on there. So to conclude, maybe people would like to ask me a question. I'm up for it if there's time. And thank you, Le Fresnoy, for having me and giving the chance to tell about my work.
Hi, Teresa.
Hello, Olivier.
Hello again. Thank you for this wonderful presentation, very clear. Well, actually, for now, I think we don't have any question yet, but if you want to say more about your work or what is ongoing now, for instance, or
yeah,
and feel free to do so.
Let me see, we have a few more minutes. So what can I say? Yeah, maybe a little bit about the solar cell technology, because I had to be very brief because I didn't know how much time we have. But the very interesting thing about this is that actually the solar cells that are created nowadays, what is not so sustainable about them is that for one, they use hard metals in there, rare metals. So we are using materials that actually on our planet, we cannot continue to use them because at some point, we will start to run out. So this specific technique, it will, with using this fruit enzyme, it reduces, it eliminates the need to use these hard metals. So that's one really great thing. And at the same time, it's the same story for very toxic chemicals that are usually needed to create these solar cells. In this new solar cell, the organic solar cell, you do not need to use these toxic chemicals as well. They are just using an enzyme, and it's an enzyme from kiwi fruit. And you might know when you eat kiwi, you feel like on your tongue, you feel that it tickles slightly. And this tickling sensation on your tongue, it's actually a defense system from the kiwi itself against insects and predators. So it's actually a meat-eating enzyme. So what are they doing? With this solar cell technique, they use this kind of corrosive oxidizing enzyme to create a oxidized layer on titanium. And that is what they usually need to do with chemicals and 6 hours of heating on 600, 700 degrees. And now they can just do that with a kiwi enzyme. So this is really a super development. And very, very surprising as well that a fruit can do something so interesting. And so we're going to work together also with Zespri in New Zealand, of course, the biggest kiwi industry we all know of. And we're going to use their kiwi waste, which is actually now, because of the crisis, it's piling up, of course, enormously because the export has gone down. So there's enormous amount of kiwi fruit waste. And so possibly, it's definitely going to be a very needed revolution within the green energy technology to work with these organic solar cells in the future.
We actually have a question from someone in the audience. Do you think people in the future will be able to harvest their own bacteria cell to provide light in their house?
And they mean, does she mean, he or she mean their own cells in their body? What does it?
Or in nature, I mean.
Okay, it's okay, yeah.
I mean, is it something that?
No, I think definitely. I mean, I have even been thinking about ways to do this because. To give you an example, when I exhibit like the current exhibition in Amsterdam, these bacteria, I can just bring them there because my studio is in Amsterdam. And in the Netherlands, Belgium, France, it's all fine. But for instance, when I had an exhibition in New York, it was much more complicated because there are a lot of restrictions. The moment you send a microbe from continent to continent, there's actually quite some restrictions about this. So this time we solved it by sending it from the Ghent University to Harvard, and Harvard sent it to the Cooper Hewitt Museum. But of course, that is not maybe a very logical solution because if you think about it, that, I was personally thinking that they would probably be able to find these microbes in their own surrounding, in their own environment. So it would be much more logic actually for if there would be a large number of people in the United States to be needing this microbe, that they would harvest it just locally or harvest like to collect it locally. And that would just need to take some research on where to find them. But it's all just like do-it-yourself kind of manuals that it's possible to create it. You probably do need the systems created by someone like I'm creating them with the electrode I was showing. That will make your work much more easier if you're trying to make this yourself. I hope that answers your question.
I was wondering, how is your experience of working with scientists? Could you tell us a bit about that aspect of your work?
Yes, of course. Well, I had the lucky position that, of course, I studied biology for some years, so that the first connection to scientists, it was easily made through an old professor of mine who was very interested to work with the arts. But then on the other hand, I'm experiencing that scientific institutes are very open nowadays to work with artists and designers. Not, of course, everyone, but if you look at how a university works, a professor is very used to working with young people and people that they instruct. And so it very fits their daily base work to work with someone that they need to instruct on a certain project. So usually when you approach someone, and just to give you a tip, if this is maybe a student thinking of doing something like this in the future, if you would approach a professor within a certain topic, sometimes you have the wrong person at first, but they all know each other. So they will refer you to someone else, and then it's even greater, because once you get in this kind of network, they all know each other and you get to the right person in the end. And for me, it's always felt very, very nice and very natural to work with scientific institutes, also because actually scientific research and innovation, it's very creative. Like I'm saying, with these kiwi fruit enzymes, it's quite a creative discovery. So we always have a lot of overlap in the way that we think. And of course, we don't understand each other at some points, but in others we do. And then, of course, the challenge is to try and complement their way of thinking by being able to create something tangible with the knowledge they have. The things that the scientists do are usually going to be published maybe in a magazine or going into a really nice publication, but oftentimes they are not developed into something tangible. And this is the challenge for creatives, to show the value of actually translating these innovations into something tangible.
And do you think that artists are key persons to trigger these discoveries, for instance, or that's always what
I'm not sure if it's triggering discoveries, but what I definitely think we are key in is to show actually how many diverse ways it is possible to implement scientific developments into daily life. So some like to give you the example of these reactors that you saw in the laboratory, where they researched for 25 years to see if they could clean our wastewater streams and generate energy. This is like, of course, it's the ultimate idea. This is what scientists come up with like a very large scale, very profitable, life-changing, very big idea. But sometimes it's maybe a step too far to start with. You can, if you work with an artist, maybe I'm not going to create something that is going to be in everyone's house, but I'm going to create something that will at least get a lot of people familiar with the existence of this technology by making an art/design object with it. And so I think a very important role for us is to get people familiar with these innovations. And on the other hand, I do think, and it's not only me saying that, it was the university as well. They were really actually happy with the collaboration. They said for instance, the Spark of Life, they thought that I could maybe keep the light on for a week or something during an exhibition. But then in the end, I quite surprised them by being able to have it on for about a year. So that was really actually a very great development, that for a whole year I could keep it on, and they were surprised by that. So I think, of course, yes, we can mutually inspire and surprise each other with the things that we complement each other with.
Yeah. One more question. Why do you define yourself as a designer? Do you define yourself as a designer or as an artist? How do you
Yeah, it's a very good question. Well, the reason why I keep saying designer, and I will forever do so, is because I am creating objects that refer to the daily life as we know it. So I create a light object which refers to a visual experience of how we usually think about a lamp, for instance. Maybe usually I don't even call it a lamp, but like a bulb, or you know, a TL tube or something like this. This is how we think about light objects. So if I would work with something, a technology that we've never heard about, and then I would create a shape that we've never seen before, then maybe it is harder for people to accept this into their experience of this can be part of our daily life. So that's why I refer to design objects, maybe more so with spark of life and embryo than with electric life, the insects I mean. But in the end, I also think that these explorations of mine, I mean, it's a fairly young studio. I think in the end, they will lead to objects that will be at people's homes. So like now the consumer version that I'm making, it might just be happening someday, you know, that you will have this at your home. So then I'm a designer, yes, because I'm making a multiple series of light objects for people.
Well, thank you for your awesome work and presentation.
Thank you so much
for sharing your experience as well.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.